Well, it's a pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today. For 41 years, Lynn Levine has been a consulting forester to private landowners, managing over 15,000 acres of land. She recently transferred her business to a remarkable young forester and has started a new business called Nature Connect. Lynn has led thousands of people into the woods to share her love of nature. Her new business will allow her to do more of that kind of work. Lynn has worked numerous nature interpretive trails. In Brattleboro alone, that includes Fairwinds Farm, the Delta Campus, the Retreat Trails, and most recently on the Rotary supported disc golf course. And she's worked with Rob Spieler on this. Rob might be able to fill us in a little more on that after. Currently, Lynn is working with the Brattleboro Conservation Commission on a new West River Trail. It's an interpretive sign project, and her efforts include Abenaki culture and history. Lynn also has written several books. She co-authored Working with Your Woodland and 2 mammal tracks and scat life-size tracking guides. I have one of these guides. It's a great book. You can take it out into the woods. It's protected from the rain and the wind and all that stuff. And it's very helpful in trying to interpret what the signs of different animal tracks and their scat and identifying what these animals are. She's also created 2 children's books, Snow Secrets and Is It Time Yet? And in 2019, she published a new book, Identifying Ferns the Easy Way. I haven't gotten this one yet. I'll have to get that one. For the past 2 decades, Lynn has been the owner of the publishing firm Heartwood Press. She was born in Brooklyn and moved to Vermont in 1974. She first lived in the house that my dental practice is in. 4 years later, having received her master's degree in forestry from the University of Massachusetts, Lynn became the first female consulting forester in the Northeast. So it's my honor to welcome Lynn, who will share with you about how the climate crisis affected her forestry career and how it impacts the forests we all love. So welcome, Lynn. You have to unmute, Lynn.
Here I am. Hi. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jerry, for your introduction. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you asking me to talk. Jerry said, what topic would you like to talk about? And I was like, this is the most important. And I've been so nervous about making this talk. And I was like, I went outside before I walked around into the woods, and I went, why am I so nervous about this? And then I realized it's because I love the forest so much, and it's so much important part of my life. So I found this topic to be so critical for what's going, not just the forest, but in the world in general, that I wanted to address it. So I came up with 4 main ways that climate change has, according to Lynn Levine, affected the forest and me. And I know George Ware's out there somewhere, and he was, and so we had another forester out there to support me. So that's great. And so the first, it was already mentioned, David Trombley mentioned that he had a storm come down and the trees come down. Well, guess what? You all know we're having more and more storms. And one of my great stories was when I was on the Whetstone Brook and I was in the woods. I'm by myself in the woods. That's what a forester does. And it starts to be lightning. And I'm like, okay, this is the worst place to be, is in the forest, as you all know, right? And so I wound up trying to get back. And And I stumbled a little bit, but I finally got to the brook, which is the Whetstone Brook, and it was up to my waist. And I'm like, how do I get across it? I guess I did, huh? Because I'm here. So we're just seeing more and more. And so there's more days that, you know, we're missed as a forester going out into the woods. I can tell how much it's changed because I'm responsible for making contracts between myself and, not between me, I'm the intermediary between the landowner and the logger. And usually you put out a year contract. You're going to complete this job in a year and I'm going to oversee it. Guess what? It doesn't work anymore. I can't put out year contracts because it's taking so long for them to do it because of the mud, because of the short winter season. So that all adds up to that. They're fixing their equipment a lot because they're not in the woods doing the work. And the state has new rules because need bigger bridges, more water bars, and everything to impact that makes erosion control less, which is critical. And that's the most critical thing we do, is not add soil into the water. So the other thing that happens is that less people come to my workshops that I do, and it's just funny to see how many times I've had to reschedule it because it didn't work. So, you know, I'm not getting a lot of smiles out there, you guys, in my store. You're all really serious, and I can only see 9 of you because I'm on an iPad right now. So I'm used to being out in front of a group and really making people laugh as I'm talking. So it's great. So the next big one is the invasive plants. It wasn't until I went back to look at my plans, and it wasn't until 1978 that I wrote down that there were any invasive plants on a property. Not that they weren't there at all, but it's the first time I saw it and the county forester saw it, Charlie Richardson. All the foresters were starting to find all these invasive plants. So what's the problem with invasive plants? Well, they stop the rest of the forest from growing. And I went to see how many of times I've had a client. So I've had 150 clients now, or I did. And every single plan I just wrote in the 10 years said, invasive plants, we need to do something. So I went back, and how I really know is I went back to one of the harvests I did. I was so excited. We had a pine stand. We were going to regenerate into more pine, and there were little saplings going there. And then this is in Dummerston and on Mrs. Simmons' land. And when I went back and looked, when I did an update 10 years, there were no pine trees. It was just all invasives. It was the most disturbing experience. And so from then on, unlike a lot of foresters, I know, not George, he did this too, but is that I wouldn't do a harvest until after we took care of the invasive plants. Because otherwise, that's all that was growing there. It was, it didn't make any sense. Every activity I did in the woods resulted in invasive plants. So then I spent all this time trying to figure out how to deal with it. And sometimes, you know, one of the women I worked with, she'd run out into the woods, Alicia, and like pick as many as she could. Other times we girdled trees. Other times we got government funding, all to deal with the invasive plants, which are just all increasing. And it's like, I love the forest. It's just completely turning around into something else. one of the things that happened to me once, and it happened to me more than once really, is that Japanese barberry, have any of you touched Japanese barberry? It's kind of sticky, has thorns on it. And I was in a property that had barberry up, I'm not kidding, it was up to my chest. No one had done anything for 10 years on that property. And I had to make my way through it. It was not a fun experience. So I do not want invasive plants in the woods. They're not fun to be with. And they stop us from having natural forest. And one of the things that happened, one of the storms, like Irene, completely moved the knotweed completely along the banks. So we had the storm, and then that produced and made the invasives more prevalent. So Lyme disease. Any of you have Lyme disease or had it? No, Jerry had. I can only see 9 of you on my screen, 8 including me. And so it wasn't around. In the 70s, 10, 20 years ago, no one I knew had Lyme disease. And it's critical for a forester because we don't walk on trails, we walk through the woods. And that's where the ticks are, because the ticks live in shrubby plants where it's moist. And so when I go to a forestry conference, everyone's talking in the background about the ticks and did you get any ticks? Did you get Lyme disease? And and then people, I know so many people that are my friends or whatever that do not want to walk in the woods anymore because they're afraid of getting Lyme disease. Is that any one of you here that have been afraid? So it's been a big, in terms of just doing my talks and taking people out into the woods, there's so many people afraid, and I make sure that they're wearing the right clothes. Then we have deer. Let's see. Yeah, we have deer. So deer, the population of deer. Okay, in the 1940s, there was like no deer. We had to bring in deer because they had been extirpated. And then over time, the deer population kept on going up, and hunters less. So what we've seen recently is that hunting, well, it's gone less, but the warm seasons mean that there are more deer. More deer. What's the problem with more deer? Everyone likes to see a deer. I love to see a deer. But there's no forest because there's too many deer. Now, I'm not exaggerating, because if you look, spend some time and go look in the woods on the ground, you'll see that all that's growing is beech or invasive plants because the deer have eaten it. Or because you'd see less wildflowers. Japanese, there's been an increase of the reduction of wildflowers too. So it's really made that, I've watched that happen. I fought so hard. I was called a bitch in the last 2 years for the forest, for the Fish and Wildlife, because every forester, George worked so hard on this issue, has watched more and more deer increase. This year, they believed us, and they've changed the rules of hunting, so there will be more hunting going on. But whether or not this is enough, I don't know. All I know is that we're the only state in the union that does not allow hunting of antlerless deer rifles, which would be a way to bring it down, but we won't allow it. So we don't know if this is going to be effective or not. So I guess I would say, and then there's insects coming in, like hemlock woolly adelgid. One of the great stories I have is the Powlings. I worked for them. They're 3 generations of loggers, and we had this harvest, and we looked like it was tons of oak coming up. And then I've been having this argument about this for decades with Calvin Powling, whether there's more deer or not enough deer, and he'll tell me there isn't enough deer. And then I showed him the oak sapling that he thought was going to make it, and it had eaten 5 times. He believed me. That's what it took, is actually seeing it. So I don't know where I'm at in time, so you tell me. Are we ready for questions, or you have?
Yes, thank you, Lynn. So does the membership have questions?
I've got a question.
Frank?
Yeah. Hi, Lynn. In the introduction, Jerry had said something about your affiliation with the West River Trail. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? I'm up in Brookline with Roger Albee, and I've heard that there's extension of the West River Trail to the north, and I'm just curious about that.
Well, that is going on, and there's a lot of movement in that direction. I know more about what's going on in Brattleboro and Dummerston, which is where there is an existing trail, and we came up with the idea, or I came up with the idea, and the commission went behind us. We got a grant to make an interpretive trail to, with an Abenaki perspective, talk about that. So yes, it is continuing, and no, I don't know a lot about that.
Jerry?
Thanks, Lynn. I'm just curious, you know, we're talking about the climate change, and you're talking about the changes in the forests with insects and higher deer population and the invasive species. Do you feel these are all related with that, because of the warmer climate? Is that your feeling on it?
Yes, that's why I mentioned those 4 particular aspects that in my career, I've watched them increase, and so has climate change. And it's just gonna, and not all of you are gonna believe in climate change, so that's okay. But my personal experience is watching the changes happening. And what's happening is a change, is the climate. That's what we can say.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Question.
Yeah.
Where do you see the maple industry in 50 years with the climate change?
Really, it's having trouble right now, not even 50 years from now, because the amount of time that you can sugar has decreased. So there's less time to do that. Sugar maple does exist way south, but we are seeing a movement of maple going north. I mean, of many species going north. 50 years from now, the prediction is that they're going to be in Canada, the maples. So we're going to really, really see a big change in terms of what we do, unless we make some changes in what we do to reduce climate change.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Lynn, Carl. Back in the days of the Pilgrim, so maybe you could just verify this for me. I'd heard that the reasons they're called the Green Mountains is back then there was more softwood here, and the maple was actually introduced to the area. Is that history, whatever its timeline is that true?
The Green Mountains right now are higher up in elevation, so they're higher to conifers, more spruce and fir growing there. So that's the condition. There was more beech that's been documented, but in terms of the maple everything moves south because of the glacier. and there were no trees here. And then slowly they moved back. But that's not what, as far as I know, I've never heard that. I don't know.
I know that the England claimed they'd give grants to land, but they'd retain the right to the wood for the masts for the sails, and that wasn't hardwood. I think that was softwood too. So it kind of was logical to me. I don't even remember where I read or heard it, but anyhow, thank you.
Sure. And what we did was we brought black locust. Black locust is not native to this area. It's brought in for the masts too. So a combination of both. And one of the things that we say is that that the American Revolution was started because of the pine trees, because the king said, I own trees more than 24 inches and you can't cut them. So that's that part of our history, and settlers didn't really like that very much. So.
Yeah, there's land grants in property titles today called glebe land, and I think it's related, but
Actually, Carl,
yes.
much of Putney Mountain was glebe land.
There's a lot in Guilford too. But I think that had to do with the grant in which they retained the rights to the timber. It's a long ways to the ocean. I'm not sure I'd want to be the one dragging that mast, but they didn't have dams on the river back then either.
It wasn't too long that you can start seeing all these wonderful pictures of all the loggers or whatever on the Connecticut River moving the wood down south. That was one of the movement patterns that were how wood moved was in the river.
Now I see a small vine everywhere, and it seems to be spreading everywhere, and it climbs up trees but I can't tell how it's spreading. What is the name of that?
Well, there's more than one possibility. There's woodbine, which would be, oh, that's so great. Woodbine is so pretty, it turns red. Or
No.
It could be bittersweet. And bittersweet is oriental bittersweet. It is not a native species. It is so easy to reproduce itself. My husband loves to pick invasive plants for, he spent 150 hours in the state park picking invasives. When he pulls up bittersweet, I wouldn't call it butter at all. It can last 90 feet, the root.
So it's the roots, it's a root plant.
It's so extensive. If you just pull something up, it's gonna sprout again. So that's really part of it. And people have it as plants. I mean, their backyard. So, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then they spread from there. That's beautiful, ornamental, red and yellow, beautiful berries. And people love to see that. It spreads in the woods. So it is a problem.
I've noticed this year that the brilliant colors of invasives more than I have in the past. It's ugly and beautiful at the same time.
So what you're looking at is probably winged euonymus. That turns all our shrubs red. And if you drive down Putney Road or anywhere in Brattleboro, you can start to see the red shrubs, and they wind up in the woods. So when I'm helping deal with invasive plants, I'm doing it one property at a time. I can't go into Brattleboro and try to get everyone to take their winged euonymus out, but I can, in the woods, do something about it.
Thank you very much, Lynn. If we do not have any other questions, I'd like to thank you very much for the presentation today. You've been at their club before, I can remember.
What, 2 other times?
Yes. And I think one time, I think it was you, wasn't it, that you had us all in a circle and sit down on each other's laps to create a continuous line? Was it you that did that?
Probably.
I couldn't remember. We think of the Quality Inn or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. We
Rob
can't do
has-
that today. So
President-
if there are no other questions or announcements,
Rob has a comment.
Rob?
Hi, Lynn. It's a pleasure to see you. And I just want to make a brag for you and the amazing work you did with us on the disc golf course with the interpretive signs that are at each one of the 18 tees on the disc golf course. It was a real joy walking the woods and learning so much. And if you don't also know, well, you know, Lynn, but for everybody in the club, if you don't know, there's also trees that are labeled throughout the park. And it's sort of a treasure hunt to see if you can find all the trees that we labeled on all the fairways. There's about 1 tree labeled per fairway. So the species name is labeled. And it's been really fun to bring that aspect of nature out in the disc golf course. So it's great to see you here, and thanks again for all your work. Big brag for you.
And thanks, Rob, for all your work for making that. To be with Rob in the woods is joyful because he is so happy being there. So together we're joyful.
He's so good, he doesn't lose many discs, so he's always happy. Okay, we'll call this meeting to an end. Thank you for attending today's Rotary meeting, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
Thank you, Lynn, and thanks, everybody.
Goodbye, everyone.